Yo, yo, yo. Hello, hello, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, as always, Kane Sims, and today we have an epic conversation lined up for you with Beerud Sheth, who is the co-founder and CEO of Gupshup and the ex-co-founder and creator of, founder and creator of Upwork. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you entrepreneurial minded people have probably used Upwork in the past. And so we're going to be talking about Gupshup. We're going to be talking about the conversational AI platform that Gupshup has, and all about Beerud's journey and the emerging markets, which is incredibly interesting. There's a lot of trends that we're going to get into, lots of differences and similarities between those emerging markets and the likes of the US and Europe and stuff like that. And it's going to be epic. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. But first, there's two things to tell you about before we kick off. One is a free workshop that I'm running with Cognigy coming up week after next. And it's going to be all about assessing your customer experience maturity. And if you come and join this workshop, you will have an interactive time, 2 hours long. It's going to be a proper workshop. It's not a webinar, where we're going to walk you through some of the real core components of customer experience maturity. And you'll be able to collaborate with other attendees at the event to be able to understand how you can level up your customer experience game. There's going to be things in there about conversational AI and automation, but it is a high level and more general customer experience maturity workshop. There's a whole bunch of exciting exercises that are going to help you develop things like a vision for your future of your customer experience, looking at the roles and responsibilities and people that you need within the team and influencers and stakeholders that you need to have on board. We're going to look at some actions that you can take today and in the next 6 and 12 months to be able to start bringing your vision to life, and a whole lot more. So please do go to vux.world/Cognigy if you want to sign up for that. It is completely free, but be prepared to roll up your sleeves because it will be an engaging, hands-on workshop. That is vux.world/Cognigy, Cognigy. And I'd like to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor, Deepgram. Deepgram has been sponsoring this show for a while now. Deepgram has industry-leading speech recognition technologies built on neural networks and deep learning approaches. And the difference between Deepgram and many other providers out there is that Deepgram's general speech recognition models tend to outperform most other models, even some models when they've been retrained and had additional training on top of them. Plus, you can actually retrain those models as well, which means that you can get increased accuracy from your speech recognition, which not only helps if you're recording things like phone calls or meetings and you want to get accurate transcripts for compliance or what have you, but also crucially, if you're creating voice assistants, you want to be feeding as accurate data as you possibly can into your NLU to give your NLU the best chance of being able to match that to an intent. And Deepgram has a whole bunch of tooling that enable you to get super accurate speech recognition, 99% in some cases, in some use cases. So go to deepgram.com/VUX world to learn more about that. That is deepgram.com/VUX world. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please welcome Beerud Sheth, who is the CEO of Gupshop. Beerud, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Ken, for having me here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm very much appreciative of your time. You were just saying there that you've just returned from Europe, a nice trip abroad. So hopefully you're nice and relaxed and feeling your way into the week.
Well, it was part vacation, part work. I did go to India as well, which was all work. And
Right.
then also, these days, remote work means, you can work from anywhere, which means oftentimes you do. And that's not so good either. But yeah, it was good. There was a month on the road living out of suitcases. That can become challenging, but no complaints. It was all good.
Nice, wicked. Well, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on the success that you've been having. It seems as though a day doesn't go by when I open LinkedIn or open my emails and I don't get an email saying that Gupshup has done something or acquired someone or done. There's something happening seemingly every week with you and your team. So, congratulations on the success. It must be a pretty busy time over there.
Well, thank you, but look, you don't get rewarded for doing acquisitions. You get rewarded for doing something with the acquisitions that you do. So, I think the jury's still out. So, for you to congratulate us, but yeah, there's a lot of momentum, lots of good things happening, lots to keep us busy.
Nice. Well, congratulations on the momentum. Then perhaps is another way of phrasing it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, things must be clicking and going in the right direction. You've raised a hell of a lot of funds, 100 million, I think it was, followed by 240 million last year, valued at, what is it, 1.4 billion? There's not many
Right.
unicorns in the conversational AI space, so you're part of a rare club already. So yeah, the direction must be a good direction to be heading in.
Yeah, yeah, I think, there's good momentum, good revenue scale. We are seeing a lot of growth. We are a profitable company, and we continue to have a very comprehensive product suite, a lot of investments in our product roadmap, and one of the largest teams perhaps in the conversational messaging and AI space. So I think there's a lot of assets we've accumulated, and we are investing heavily, looking to scale it up. So excited about the opportunity, and just keeping at it. Yeah.
Nice. So how would you describe Gupshup to someone who hasn't come across Gupshup before?
So we describe ourselves as a conversational engagement platform. Okay, and that's a bit of a technical term, but we help businesses engage better with their consumers uh, through conversational messaging. Right. So traditionally, businesses have engaged with their consumers through websites, through mobile apps, maybe even offline stores and branch locations. But as messaging is emerging as the new sort of medium for engaging customers, and to do it better across multiple messaging channels. Could be SMS, could be WhatsApp, could be Instagram, Telegram, RCS, and so on. It could be basic notifications, right, which are alerts, transaction alerts, package tracking alerts, booking confirmations, things like that, or rich conversational two-way messaging as well, right, which then takes you into advanced conversational AI and so on. So anyway, I think really, in a nutshell, we enable conversational interactions between businesses and consumers. In fact, many of your listeners may not know that the word Gupshup itself means chit chat, right, or conversation in Hindi. So I think it's very appropriately named in that sense. And our tagline sort of says, one on one with everyone, right? So it's sort of really having personalized conversations at scale. That's what we do.
Nice. You already answered my next question there, which was what does Gupshup stand for? Because it's a very different name. It's something that just stands out. Everything has AI at the end of it these days.
Right.
Um, and yeah, Gupshup is a very very interesting term.
Yeah, you should. I talk about, for non-Indian, people who don't know the language. I say, remember this as the next famous word from the language that gave you yoga, nirvana, and Kama Sutra.
Nice, nice.
Everybody knows those terms, right?
They do, they do, they do. And didn't Buddhism originate kind of was it India that Buddhism originated in?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think really, and I'm no expert. So the simple version is, there's really been two places in the world where most religions originated, right? One was the Middle East, right, Israel perhaps, where Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam was sort of an offshoot of Middle East and Arabia and so on. And then there are the Indic languages, which all came out of India, right, including Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and then even all the Zen and Shintoism and so on were all offshoots of that school
Mm.
of thought. So anyway, really, it's got to be one or the other,
Yeah, yeah. Well, ironically, I know this is a bit of a digression, but I read something the other day, and who knows how this information got to light and where it come from. It could be complete rubbish for all I know. But for any kind of Christians out there, I read somewhere that actually Jesus himself, apparently in his 20s, went traveling to India and studied Buddhism for an extended period of time. And so my little theory in the back of my mind is, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but it's that what Jesus was doing was trying to actually tell people about Buddhism, and they kind of misconstrued it and turned it into Christianity.
Okay, well, I
Yeah,
have nothing to add there.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, that's we digress. But so that was where you began, though, was it? The journey of Gupshup was beginning with providing these services. Was it in India that you began in terms of a target market, target geography? Like, where did it start?
Yeah, I think now, I mean, I grew up in India, but I came to the US for grad school, right? and I've been here since then. As you mentioned earlier, I've been a serial entrepreneur. I founded Upwork, right? So I've been based in Silicon Valley for a long time. And then when we got started with Gupshop, um, I think, like many companies do, right, we set up the engineering team in India. And I think as we were kicking around different ideas, the mobile revolution was taking off. The next billion or maybe 5 billion users, they were not on this desktop version of the web, right? They were all sort of on the mobile version of the web. And these mobile first ecosystems, right, they did not adopt sort of web technologies as much. They all went to mobile, and on mobile, messaging is the lowest common denominator, right? And initially it was just SMS with feature phones, right? And then with smartphones you had more richer interactions and so on. So the biggest aha, right, back in 2007, 6 or 2007 or something, right, was sort of messaging is the lowest common denominator. It reaches the most people worldwide in a form factor that they're comfortable and convenient, and that they're comfortable with and is convenient for them. So then that begs the question: what kind of digital services can you layer on top of the messaging channel? And the more you can do there, the more people you can reach, right? So I think that was it. And I think just that problem is still something we're trying to solve and take it to its sort of logical extreme, right? So initially it was just SMS, which is, as you know, a very primitive protocol, right? It's just 160 characters of plain text, right? Which is, by the way, where Twitter got its inspiration from as well, right? So really, there's not much you can do with it, but it's still very powerful because it reaches everyone, right? So in the beginning, they were just basic notifications, but then as messaging channels themselves got richer, you could do a lot more with it. You could do two-way conversations, images.
Sorry, Beerud, I think I've lost you there. Hold on a sec. Can you still hear me? You can hear me. Hold on. Is it my headphones? Don't think it's my headphones. Can you hear me still? Check the mute button at the bottom of the screen. Is that? I'm just checking my headphones. My headphones seem to be all right. Can you hear me still, Beerud, or not? Doesn't look like it. Technical hiccup, boys and girls. We will return momentarily. Just make sure that Beerud can hear me. Yes, but you're muted. Yes, that's true. One sec, cool. Maybe try rebooting or something like that. Cool. We will give Beerud a little time just to rejoin us. But it's interesting, this story so far. What we haven't got to yet, which we will, is that Gupshop. Oh, here we go. There you go. That's better.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. We'll edit the audio out of that part. For those that are bearing with us live, thank you for bearing with us. So it cut out round about the time you were discussing the fact that, when you first founded Gupshop, the messaging channel was kind of like underdeveloped. There was no internet. Basically, it was all SMS. It was very limited. And then you were kind of going on from there, and it kind of cut out midway through.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think in the beginning it was all SMS, so you could do notifications, transaction alerts, updates, and so on. But then, as smart feature phones evolved into smartphones, as messaging channels evolved into OTT apps, and so on, now messaging channels are much richer. You can have images, you can have clickable, quick replies, and two-way conversational interactions, and all of that. So now the platform itself has gotten a lot richer, which means you can layer on a lot more interesting services that we'll talk about. So I think that's been the evolution of our journey. And I think in this is a really big deal, especially in the mobile first parts of the ecosystem, right? I think sitting in US or Western Europe, where the digital ecosystem is primarily web centric, right? You don't appreciate messaging is sort of an incremental channel for communication, for notification, and so on, right? And the idea is to you drive a message that or you send a message that drives traffic back to the web to finish the transaction, right? But when you go to these mobile first ecosystems, no, the message is, is the platform. The message is where you do the transaction. You don't send users anywhere else,
Mm.
right? So it's far more significant. It's sort of the primary digital backbone. It's not an incremental channel for doing something extra. It is sort of the primary channel in which everything gets done, and that opens up a lot more possibilities.
It's interesting because I know that you likes of China and stuff with WeChat. It has a whole bunch of capabilities layered on top of it to the point where it's not really a messaging app. It's a all your banking and your kind of restaurant reservations. Everything's all within the one kind of place. Is that the kind of experiences that your clients in those kind of markets are creating? These like one-stop messaging shops where you can do everything that you need to do when you engage with a business.
So yes and no, and it's a little nuanced, right? So let me explain. Firstly, you're right. I mean, WeChat is just an amazing platform, right? It's not just a messaging app, but a super app, which enables a wide range of possibilities, right? So you can not just chat with your friends, but you can interact with businesses. And virtually every business in China is on WeChat, right? If you visit as a tourist, you can book, buy, shop, and pay. Every restaurant will have restaurant table will have a QR code which you scan and something happens. Every billboard, every packaged consumer good that you buy will have some QR code which links to some WeChat experience, and so on, right? So it's very deeply integrated into the ecosystem. So that's where the similarities are. And by the way, the reason why it works this way inside the messaging app is because it takes care of identity, authentication, the wallet, payment integration. All of that is part of the messaging app, which everybody uses anyway. And then when you layer on all these business interactions, that the super app, I mean, it really sort of enables this vision of a super app, right? So that's where messaging is a powerful sort of container to enable these richer services. But where it's different is that these are not conversational experiences, right? So WeChat has this thing, they call it a mini program. And a mini program is essentially an HTML5 web page, right? So it's still really a web metaphor, a web page. And inside that messaging app, you have a different section, right? So there are all your messaging threads, and then there's a different section for mini programs where you can interact with any business and do it, right? So it's still inside the messaging app, but it's a very different metaphor. It's a very different experience, right? But when we look at Western sort of products, right? If you look at a WhatsApp or a Facebook Messenger or Instagram, even, and so on, I think usually these products are designed. We like them to be clean, a single metaphor. You're not going to mix metaphors, right? So that's where if you are true to your conversational experience, then you'll say yes, let's have businesses also interact. Let's also have consumers. Let's embed business messaging inside the messaging app, just like it's in WeChat. But let's not mix up the metaphor, right? Let's keep it each thing as a conversational thread. So you still have a list of threads, and then you chat in each of those threads. It's just that some of them are personal conversations and some of them are business conversations. So that's what I meant, right? Yes, it's
Mm.
similar to WeChat in that it's all wrapped inside the messaging app, but it's different from WeChat in that you have conversational threads versus mini programs.
Interesting. And so in the West, as you mentioned, messaging is often something that's like secondary or an added feature. So if you mentioned Instagram, the messaging part of Instagram is like it's a bit hidden out the way kind of thing. Same thing with Facebook and Facebook Messenger, it's a bit hidden out the way. WhatsApp arguably is a channel that is used a heck of a lot, certainly for personal relationships. Same thing as iMessage and stuff like that. But businesses haven't quite gravitated to it. All of these messaging channels, even Google My Business, you can build bots on Google My Business messaging, which all of these things, when put together, I think show that there is significant opportunity there. But we had Charles Guth from Decathlon, large sports retailer, on the podcast a few weeks ago. They shut their call center when COVID hit, and they focused on automating their messaging channels. And with a combination of Instagram, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Google My Business, they've completely absorbed all of their contact center contact, and a lot of it is being automated now through conversational AI. But that's a really unique uh, case study when you compare it to most other businesses and how they operate typically. So I'm wondering if you can kind of maybe draw out a little bit of some of the maybe the differences in terms of customer behavior that exists in some of the markets that you're serving, and how, as you were saying, messaging seems to be is messaging at a point where it's the default channel for customers and for users in that part of the world, or not?
Yeah. So I think exactly right. Like you said, even in the Western markets, there's a ton of opportunity where messaging experiences, right, through Google Business Messages, through RCS, through Instagram DMs, right, and Facebook Messenger itself. There's a lot of opportunity. Also, you see a lot of these chat widgets on websites and so on, right? So clearly, there's a massive growth opportunity in in enabling rich interactive experiences between businesses and consumers. It can reduce sort of call center expenses. It can actually improve call center quality. It can provide instant 24 by 7 instant response with no wait time whatsoever. I mean, these are extremely powerful capabilities, right? So there's no question that there's a huge untapped market that businesses should do, right? But I think beyond a certain point, I think as it matures, there's also some limits to how big the opportunity can be, because the web is a mature ecosystem, right? People have built websites. Consumers use websites for commerce. It has, and not just the experience itself, but the whole ecosystem around it, right? Being able to advertise, being able to track and analyze and optimize and monetize and all of that. The whole infra is set up, right? So it's sort of it is very web centric. So messaging can will grow to its fullness. There's a ton of opportunity in these markets. But when you get to emerging markets, it's sort of it's a twice bigger opportunity, in the sense that, of course, everything you could do in Western markets for these messaging use cases applies, right, in the emerging markets. But even the web centric transactions and commerce and interactions can also be ported onto messaging, because in those markets, you don't have, I mean, the web, the desktop web, right, is not as prevalent. The mobile app ecosystem, again, is not as prevalent. Now, I want to be careful when I say that, right? Of course, India, Brazil, I mean, there's so many e-commerce companies, there's a lot of growth. But again, when you sort of scratch the surface a little bit, that's typically like the top sort of 100 million users in India, right? That's a huge number, by the way. That's bigger than most countries, but it's only like maybe 10% of the Indian population base, right? Or even in Brazil, I think the top of the market, e-commerce and so on, is very web centric, just like the US. But when you look at the whole sort of the masses, right? When you look at the entire base, you still have a ton of businesses that have no digital presence whatsoever, right? The corner grocery store, the pharmacy, the restaurant, and so on. I mean, they may have no digital presence at all, and there's like tens of millions of businesses like that, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is, the digital revolution almost hasn't reached some of these parts of the world, in quite the same way as we know it in the US and in the Western markets. So I think that's to me, yes, the messaging opportunity in the US is huge. But in emerging markets, it's like transformational. It is the platform, right? It is
Mm,
as if we're in the mid 90s, where the web is emerging for the first time, except in a different format, right? Sort of in this sort of messaging and conversational form factor, right? So I think that's a really big deal, right? So it's sort of, I mean, as we know, with hindsight, from the mid 90s when the web happened, it's created like a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem, right? I mean, so
mm,
many trillion-dollar companies that didn't exist before the web. And that's huge, right? So it's sort of really just sizing the magnitude of the opportunity. You could have something, there's no reason why what's happening in the emerging markets today cannot be of the same scale, right? And
Mm.
just like when, I think every business, every brand had to build a website, right, in the mid 90s. And with hindsight, we know there are millions and billions of websites now. You're going to have the same thing, right? The millions of chatbots or conversational experiences more generally, right, will happen more in the emerging markets, right, than sort of in the Western markets where, everybody is sort of, the web is good enough, right? There's
Mhm.
nothing, you don't need to change, but these emerging markets are leapfrogging in a much more significant way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There was conversations that I had, I would say probably even before last year, which is this around, how most businesses these days are going through some degree of digital transformation. They're going through some degree of either re-architecting their technology to be able to offer self-service and streamlined services and products on all these different channels that we've been mentioning. And that was before the advent of conversational AI. And so some of the conversations that we were having kind of like a couple of years back was almost like hypothesizing that some businesses will kind of skip the mobile revolution, so to speak, or skip the kind of, you mentioned that the small kind of mum and pop shops might skip the internet and go straight onto social media. Sorry, skip websites and go straight onto social media, which I think we've seen some do. But then there's this concept from customer behavior perspective. From the West, you can look at the adoption of things, and everything started with a desktop computer that had the internet, and then it went to mobile that had the internet, and now it's moving over to AI services. Whereas in those emerging markets, as you mentioned, hundreds of millions of users, would it be fair to say, and do you agree with this kind of notion that all of those people may skip this internet revolution, for want of a better word, skip the internet on desktop and all that kind of stuff, and almost jump straight to these AI mediated services? It sounds like that's kind of what you're kind of getting at. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. I would say messaging mediated, right? And then
Right.
AI is a part of it. But even without AI, I think just the ability to, I mean, let's take the simple thing, right? If you look at these emerging markets, what do people do with their smartphones most of the time, right? It's really, depending on which country they're in, they're using WhatsApp, for example, right? 50 times a day to communicate with their friends and family members. And now that you have businesses also having a presence there, they can chat with the business just as easily as chatting with a friend or family, right? So, and that chat could be structured, right, without AI, or could be, sometimes it may even be manual, right? You just send it to a customer support desk with human agents that can provide those responses, right? So the point is, this sort of the messaging experience and the messaging platforms are so prevalent, where every consumer, every business is on that platform, and they're using that to do more and more business, right? And then of course, you can have, so the baseline is manual, then you can have automated, and then on top of it you can have AI. And because it's a conversational medium, there's a very natural, place for NLP and NLU and all the conversational AI capabilities, right? So
Mm.
yeah, so I think it's really, I think the what I'm trying to draw towards is, sort of the, whether it's the desktop internet or the mobile internet in the West, while in emerging markets it's really, messaging is far more central. It's sort of the primary medium of interaction, not just a secondary channel like it is in the West. Yeah.
Interesting. And for your customers that are utilizing your platform to, provide services and whatnot to customers in these messaging channels, have you found in building Gupshup that you've had any particular challenges as it relates to this? Because, for example, you mentioned that like in 2007 it was all SMS based, very limited functionality on the SMS kind of channel, so, and then for example WhatsApp, things like the user has to initiate the message before you can engage the conversation, and these kind of things. Every kind of channel, so to speak, or platform type has its own restrictions and limitations, for want of a better word, that might impact what a business can actually do. Have you noticed any kind of like either challenges that have been overcome or hindrances that your customers or even yourselves that building this platform have faced when you have to deal with the capabilities and requirements and various ins and outs of all of these different messaging channels?
I mean, so yes and no. Yes, there's a lot of challenges and variations and limitations and restrictions in different channels. But then it is incumbent on platforms, tech companies like us, like Gupshup, to sort of solve it once and for all, and then make it easy for enterprises, right? So in a way, what we try to do is we try to deal with all that complexity, automate it, and hide it so that when the actual business user starts adopting it, they don't see any of that, right? They get it out of the box. So, for example, they could build a chatbot and then it just works. It works on every channel, right? So then they don't have to worry, they don't have to choose. And our engineers will deal with the complexity of, transforming message formats and managing opt-ins and managing, sort of policy and compliance issues and things like that, right? So I think in that sense, yes, right, because each of these platforms is built by different companies. SMS is, telcos control it. WhatsApp, of course, Meta controls it. RCS is Google. GBM is Google, and so on. So yes, that drives a little bit of complexity, but then it's I think it's the same with the web, right? I mean, if you
Mm,
remember anybody building a website back in the mid 90s, you had to worry about you know app servers and browser variations and hosting and data centers and you name it. And now you can spin up a website in minutes because all of that is hidden away. So I think that's how technology evolves. I think the good thing we feel, what we feel good about is Gupship has been able to scale with investment dollars and resources and engineering teams and capabilities to really build out that infrastructure, right? The platform that every business will need. Because look, if I talk about every business, every brand should be able to do this. I mean, you're talking about millions, maybe tens of millions of businesses, right? When you talk that scale, then the tools can't be complex. I mean, they have to
mm,
be, you know, quick and easy and simple, and configurable and modifiable and so on, right?
mm,
So I'm sort of uh, presuming that that will happen. Of course, Gupshup is committed to doing it, but other companies as well will try to enable all of that, right? So I mean, you kind of have to look at the opportunity, the size of the opportunity, and then your product strategy has to match that, has to be in tune with that. And there are many examples on the web, right? I mean, for example, Shopify did that for e-commerce merchants, right? I mean, they take all the typical things, right? Catalog and payment and billing and taxes and merchandising and you name it, right? Everything related to e-commerce, they sort of try to put it all together in one place, right? You look at cloud services, right? AWS and others. I mean, they try to simplify all the hosting sort of things and make it easily available to developers. Stripe has done that with payments and so on. So in the same way, right? Each of these things were very, very complex to begin with, but once you package it up nicely and if you succeed with it, then it's really valuable, right? So in the same way, we want to build that sort of conversational stack, right? And in fact, you alluded to some of the acquisitions earlier. Well, it's not like we're just out there doing indiscriminate acquisitions. I think we said, okay, what is the stack that's needed for businesses of all sizes, right? Small and large, across geographies, across industries. If we think that there's going to be millions of these conversational experiences going to be built in the next few years, what is the product stack that's required to enable it, right from the simplest and the basic, the messaging and the connectivity, to the conversational tools, whether you have human agents or just automated workflows or conversational AI, and then specialized by industry and geography and payment integrations and so on, right? So I think we're saying we're building out that whole stack. And in some cases we build it, in some cases we've bought companies that augment parts of the stack, right, that really strengthen it.
mm,
But our goal, our vision is to really and then offer a simple, unified but powerful product, right? So one is it has to be rich and comprehensive, right? And then the other is it has to be really simple to adopt and to use. And that's what we do. Yeah.
mm. So you mentioned those acquisitions. If I was to go through um, the recent ones, I mean, so we've spoke a lot about messaging. We spoke a lot about emerging markets. So you Gupshup has solved seemingly that front end problem you mentioned there, that don't worry about translating the message coming in from one platform and all that kind of stuff. Your engineers have solved for, you know, translating that message into the format that your platform will understand, that will enable those conversations to happen. You've obviously got connectors to each of these channels. You've obviously got some degree of a design studio that will enable customers to be able to build out some of these automated experiences. But then if you look at One Direct that you acquired a couple of weeks ago, agent assist capabilities, Nolarity, cloud telephony, almost like a CCAS provider, Active AI, and Ask Sid, banking and retail, respectively, conversational AI platforms. So there's domain expertise that comes with that for certain industries. And then you've got the .go, which is the rich communication services, which enables more richer interactions on the front end to happen. I mean, I could look at those acquisitions and say Gupshup is moving beyond messaging into a more kind of like horizontal conversational AI platform where the end channel doesn't really matter. What really matters is, as long as it's conversational, we'll deal with it. The channel is irrelevant, and we're also building up expertise in very specific industries like retail, banking, etc. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Is that you're now moving beyond messaging into a broader conversational AI platform?
I think that's exactly correct. You said it better than I could. I think you should help us with our marketing, perhaps. But no, that's exactly right. Right. I think so. We think of so we have the slide where we lay out the product stack, right? And the product stack, think of it as a three-layer cake, and the base layer is the channel connectivity, right? All the connectors that you talked about. So that's across every possible channel that businesses could be interested in. Certainly, SMS was the biggest for a long time. WhatsApp is growing, emerging very rapidly. RCS is something that Google and telcos are launching, right? And then you can add many more: Instagram, Telegram, Skype, and so on, which have varying degrees of traffic and so on. But that's sort of the connectivity layer, right? And once a business connects to us, then they can connect to every channel. We take care of all of that, right? So that's sort of the base layer. And then the middle layer on top is that provides, I mean, once a business is connected with this, then they need to do something, right? What messages do you send, and how do you handle the messages that come back from the user? So the middle layer is sort of the conversational layer, right? And it could be the agent assist that you talked about from one of the companies. It could be a journey builder to create sort of automated workflows. And then it could be conversational AI to have natural language capabilities to handle these queries and so on, right? So it's across sort of the pre-purchase, the purchase, and the post-purchase part of the journeys, right? So we enable all of that. And then the third layer at the top is we go even further, talking about making it easy, right? We try to templatize repeating patterns, try to standardize it, right? So, for example, banking is one of our biggest categories, right? Could we, and the use cases are very similar. So, could we just pre-package it? Could we create some templatized workflows and experiences and standardized AI? Sort of, we call it, the banking brain, for example, right? Which just means it's a pre-configured AI model. Because the use cases are very similar across different banks. So if we can do that, then now when a new enterprise or a customer wants to adopt it, they can start sort of at the 80-yard line and then just maybe configure or tweak a few things and get it ready, right? So that makes the deployment easy. Or even, let's say, on the lower end, a restaurant, right? The restaurant use case is very standardized. If you can automate one restaurant, you can do a million, and so on. So I think these are sort of the three layers. And then there's also connectors for third-party platforms. People need to connect it to CRM tools, to like maybe Salesforce, or to a commerce tool like Shopify or others, right? So I think the point is exactly right? So we looked at this whole stack, anything conversational across any channel with varying degrees of sophistication. There's a lot of complexity in that, right? So then we ask ourselves, how do we make it simple? How do we package it? How do we make it easy so that anyone, right? Sort of the no code, the low code, and the yo code version of it, right? How do we make it really simple? So for a business user to use it, somebody who's busy, doesn't have the time or the skills to do that, should be able to still get achieve their goals. And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, developers should be able to do very advanced stuff as well. So if we can build that whole stack together and deliver it, right? And I think when I look at the whole landscape, I mean, there's nobody out there who's doing it, right? Gupshup finds itself in this unique position where, because of our expertise in emerging markets, we see this opportunity in a way that few other companies see it, right? And I'm not saying intellectually. I mean, intellectually it's easy to understand, but the day to day, requirements coming in from customers, and who are talking to the hundreds of our people, right? So the breadth and depth of conversational requirements that we see from these markets really gives us a unique vantage point, right? And then so that gives us a great perspective, and then we use that to optimize a product stack and refine it and build it in a way that that has that product market fit, right? I mean, everything I described, it's not like I'm just making it up sort of in a in an academic room. I think it's really built on sort of thousands of these customer interactions, and you're refining and building it out, right? And then all the integrations and so on. So I think if we can do that, right, we're very well positioned to, I think it's to enable it, to build it, to deliver it, and make it easy for customers to adopt all of these things.
Nice. Yeah, that's a sensible approach. It's almost like the one-stop shop, isn't it? So you've got the bottom of the market, for want of a better word, is where there's easily deployable. If you imagine a restaurant, you want to get to a position really where a restaurant owner can just log in, click a button, and without, or at least if they're using something like Salesforce or something like that, plug it into their system, and all of a sudden they've got a restaurant reservation booking thing set up in minutes.
Exactly.
Um, which is ideal. I think if you had, I don't know if you already have, but some kind of RPA, robotic process automation thing on the back end for where there's no APIs for some of the larger enterprises, that's the only gap I can see at the moment. If you don't have that already, everything else is there: agent assist, cloud telephony. You got domain specific interactions, maybe speech recognition, which you might pull from a third party. But it's looking like it's shaping up.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's sort of, you need to have the breadth and the depth, right? Because when we talk to our customers, they're like, we need to engage, we need to meet our consumers wherever they are, right, on their terms. So
Mm,
sometimes they call into the call center, sometimes they send a WhatsApp message, sometimes it's a text message, sometimes, and the consumer is always right, the consumer chooses. So but on the back end, a business has to sort of unify it, standardize it, has to understand, maintain context, so if yesterday they called but today they're sending a WhatsApp, you should know who the user is and things like that, right? So just making all of that work, and making it seamless, right? If we
mm,
can enable it, like you said, a one-stop shop, sort of a unified product stack that gives you a lot of this out of the box as much as possible, then I think so what we're doing is we're investing a ton of resources. We are I mean, Gupshup was a year and a half ago. Over the last year and a half, we've gone from about 200 people now to about 1,400 people, right? So it's a massive growth in headcount, especially in engineering and product, but also in go to market. The geographical presence has grown from maybe, I think a handful of countries to now about 40 to 50 countries, heavily in the emerging markets, but also a lot in US and Europe, right? So even I mean, while I emphasize this sort of emerging market experience a lot, there's many parts of the Western ecosystem where the same dynamic plays out, right? I think, for example, the restaurant experience, I mean, that is still leaves much to be desired in the Western markets, especially this offline to online experiences can be a lot better. Or tourism, right? You have tourists traveling from all over the world in these places, and you need to be able to, it's not just Americans in America, right? I mean, you have people from all over the world coming here and would like to interact using these different channels. So I think there are probably some really large and interesting niches and opportunities in the Western markets that we are also sort of targeting. But certainly in emerging market, it's like the whole, it's really what we're doing is digitization, right? I mean,
mm,
it's a much bigger term, but it's essentially that. because it didn't happen quite as much with the web and mobile apps. It's really happening on this sort of conversational platforms. Yeah.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And you can see that some platforms and some technologies are beginning to take on more than the AI side of things. So, for example, Nolarity, for example, cloud telephony, there's nothing stopping you from actually marketing a CCaaS solution. And part of that CCaaS solution is the AI, a little bit like how Microsoft has presented its contact center, which is closely knitted to Dynamics. But if you look at the press release, nine or so of the 14 features that were announced as part of that release of a contact center was AI integration. And if you look
Right.
at Google's CCAI, the partnership they've got with UJet, the whole thing, the whole kind of contact center space is moving towards this space where I think 3 years ago, AI technology providers were kind of like add-ons to a contact center, whereas now some of the AI providers are becoming the platform with deep expertise and technology on the AI side, which enables automation a lot quicker, a lot smoother. Everything's more integrated, everything works together. But what businesses are tending to look for in that regard is that complete omni-channel experience. And so you mentioned, and we've been speaking a lot about how Gupshup began in messaging and has deep expertise in messaging, lots of customers using messaging. But then you look at Nolarity and they're
Right.
not in the realms of voice. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the adoption of voice AI technologies, voice assistants, either in the phone lines or in mobile apps and those kind of things, and how you're thinking about that in the next few months and years.
Oh, absolutely. I think uh, you know, voice versus messaging is really a matter of context, right? Meaning, if I'm in a private area, like in my car or in a kitchen, voice is fine. But if I'm in a public space, like in a meeting or out and about traveling, text is probably better. Also, if I want to look at a menu of choices, text is better, right? It's sort of been, but if there's a million items and I want to play one song, right, voice is better, right, in some ways. So I think there is really the point is it's really all conversational. I mean, in my mind, it bleeds over. In fact, it's actually going to bleed over in even more interesting ways, because with the Nolarity acquisition, where they do a lot of voice, and then of course Gupshop had a lot of strength in messaging, we're now enabling hybrid solutions, right? So, for example, when a customer calls into the call center and the agent is busy, well, instead of staying on hold for 20 minutes, what if we just deflect that experience to messaging, right?
Mm,
And then the same the full experience would be available through messaging as well. So now you can offload a lot of voice traffic to messaging. You can you can qualify, you can solve many of the problems through messaging itself. And now if the user still needs to talk at some point, then it's a highly qualified user, where you can then say, okay, it's a priority queue, and you make sure that the user gets the problem solved, right? So I think when you think of it in a holistic way, it really opens up a lot of possibilities. Then you touched on AI, right? Of course, AI, again, I think there's the state of the art on text versus voice. I mean, certainly text is a little easier to deal with than voice, which involves many different accents and ambient noise and things like that, right? But either way, right, I think what we look at, again, we're not beholden to technology, right? Whatever technology is ready and available and can be deployed at scale in a reliable way, we want to take it out to customers. And then we look at the data, right? We look at consumer behavior. What channels are they using? How are they interacting? And then what would help businesses, engage those consumers better, right? So I think voice is certainly an important part of of customer engagement.
mhm,
And yeah, so I think all of it will. The point is, consumers ultimately, I mean, then you also look at just sort of the generational differences, right? A lot of the young millennials today, I mean, they don't even like to talk to their parents, let alone talk to a business. They're like, look, why can't I just text you and get it done, right? So I think there's a lot of consumer preference as well. I mean, we are agnostic to sort of this choice of channels. I think the point is, but what's common certainly is conversational experiences, and then enabling it. It could be structured journeys, automated, could be human enabled or AI enabled. And it just depends, right? When you think about different businesses, each business has to figure out for itself, what is the state of the art, how does it fit, and then how do their consumers react to it. But yeah, I think all of these are components. That's why we look at the whole product stack, look at it holistically. We don't try to sort of sort of insist on a one size fits all kind of solution, right? Technically, what we have is a bit of a buffet laid out in front of the customers, but not in a overwhelming or confusing way. We say, look, there's a lot of flexibility here. You can pick and choose if you know what you want, or based on our experience working with other customers like you, here's what we recommend.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the standard out of the box solutions, or templates, if you will, and then there's some configurations that you could do, or some customization. If possible, we'd be happy to do it too. But even when that happens, then we try to roll it back into the product, so that the second or the third time, you don't have to customize.
Nice. A lot of kind of companies, when they get started with these kind of services, if you think about the vision of what this technology can do for a business, and there's some good examples of how far you can take it, like Capital One, for example, fantastic example of, if you take conversational AI technology and you put it at all of your touch points that you have, more or less, it can then be the front door to the business, and your whole business then gets oriented and shifted towards being a conversation first organization, with a digital assistant as your front kind of facing touch point. I think that's where a lot of companies are going to get to, and but you need to be mature in order to have that vision, to be able to say that we're going to be conversation first, we're going to be AI first, we're going to completely uproot and re-architect our data to make sure that we can deliver our services across conversational channels. You need to have a lot of sophisticated technology, both on the AI side and on the integration side, and beyond, to be able to bring that kind of stuff to life. And that means you need the skills and resources to do it. But in the entry point, as people get on that journey, the entry point usually is to start with one thing, a chatbot, a messaging bot, something similar to that. And when you do that, you can start in one of two places. You can start trying to fix a problem. Like, I was reading some articles today that someone was on hold with, I can't remember the airline, it was a Canadian airline. Someone was on hold for 11 hours trying to get a flight booked. And another one with American Airlines was from last week, which is someone was being on hold for 4 hours trying to get a flight booked. So those type of companies are highly likely to be starting off trying to fix a problem. Whereas a lot of the things that you've been talking about on the messaging front, certainly in the West, messaging is often seen as a way of exploring opportunities, a little bit like voice assistants like Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant were kind of like 3 years ago or so. I'm just curious on your thoughts when you look at the market, you look at your customers, and you look at what you're seeing. How much activity in this space is people trying to solve a problem, fix a customer problem, and resolve a pain point, versus exploring opportunities?
No, that's a great question, and it really puts an exclamation point on everything I've been trying to say so far, right? Which is, no amount of theoretical arguments will convince a business to go conversation first, right? It's going to be practical data, and let me give you a couple of examples that we are seeing in our markets, right? So there's a fintech lender in India. They give out loans for auto loans, right? And then they when they started, I think 2-3 years ago, they had a mobile app, and there was a traditional experience, right? Typically, a customer goes to a dealership, buys the auto, then goes to another desk to get the loan, and then it takes some time and process, and whatever it takes, it takes a couple of days to sort it out. And these guys, they, just because we're pitching, they said, okay, let's explore a chatbot, let's create something, and they enabled that whole experience through messaging, and through that they also uncovered some APIs and so on, so that they were able to reduce this loan approval and disbursement. So it's 2-minute approval, 20-minute disbursement of loan. And guess what? The number of customer sort of loan requests coming in over the last 6 months have gone from about 300 a month to about 12,000 a month. That's a 40x increase. Okay, so much so that all the traffic, right, 99% of it comes through the bot. The app, nobody's using that, so they basically shut it down, and now they've become a conversation first company. Okay,
Wow.
not because we convinced them, right? But because their consumers voted with their fingers with their dollars, and it really changed. And there are many other examples like this where we are seeing, there's an education company that suddenly they find that a lot of their educational materials and content. So for example, a student studying a calculus problem can scan a photo, send it through WhatsApp, and instantly get a sort of homework help, if you will, right? Or there's a real estate company that sort of they wanted people to list their apartments for rent, and they found that people listed much more easily by taking photos and sending it through WhatsApp through their mobile phone, rather than going into a website and logging in, right? So as these things happen, they become conversation first by themselves, right? And that's the point. I think in the consumer behavior in emerging markets will drive this sort of conversation first ecosystem. And I think in the Western markets, you already have a web first ecosystem deeply embedded, right? So I think this is how leapfrogging of technology happens, right? I think what typically in the Western markets, you build a chatbot and you ask an average consumer, they'll say, no, I'd rather talk to a human because there is a human to talk to, right? But in the emerging markets, if you have a chatbot that works 25% of the time, that's a miracle because the alternative is no one to talk to, right? So when you
Ah.
have that, the willingness to adopt version 1, version 2, or version 3 of a chatbot is there. And by the time we get to version 10, guess what? It'll be world class anyway. But we had the opportunity and the ability to invest in every incremental version because we had enterprise customers that are willing to pay for, and use these things. And in the using is where you get the consumer feedback to then refine, each incremental version of the product, right? So I think this whole conversation first mindset and that trend, I think is the fertile ground for that, right? Is the emerging markets, because in the Western markets the web first paradigm is so deeply embedded and it works really well. And one could argue, well, do you really need an alternative, right? So yeah, there may be pockets, maybe the call center space, maybe some web widgets, there's some conversational marketing, some chatbots, and so on. There's quite a few interesting sizable opportunities still. But you know but in the emerging markets, it's a substitute for the whole freaking web. I mean, that's like massive, right?
And there's a significant amount of people as well. It's like probably more people than there is in the West. And so it's like a substitute for the whole web is, yeah, it's scary how big the opportunity is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you're right. I think the number of people is huge. The volume of conversation is going to be massive. The depth of, the richness of requirements and capabilities, and so on. So once you kind of put it all together, right? I think this is a new web that's emerging, a conversational web, a conversation first sort of interaction paradigm. And I think you're going to see that, because it's stepping into a vacuum, right? It's not stepping into a mature web centric world. It's stepping into a place where there was nothing. And this works so well. It works brilliantly. Consumers are adopting it, and so on. And when that, as you keep turning that flywheel, I mean, a few years down the road, we'll look at it and say, wow, that's insane. I mean, we would still be making sort of theoretical arguments in the West as to why it's better. Meanwhile, you'll, you'll have massive consumer adoption and some amazing technology being developed in another part of the world. And by the way, once that gets done, right, because these things take time, it takes investment, it takes iteration and feedback. And as you know, AI depends on data. But you need people to use it, right? Otherwise, if everybody wants the perfect chatbot, well, where are you going to get the data from? So, I think you need, right now, we need people to use imperfect chatbots so that you
Mm.
can actually capture the data to then build the perfect one. And I think that will happen uh, in another part of the world. And I think that really is what we are excited about. We are seeing just a ton of opportunity, just trying, scrambling to keep up with it, to build out all those rich capabilities, make it simple, make it easy, and keep rolling it out.
Nice, nice. And in those years when the new internet, the new AI first internet, conversation first internet exists over there in those emerging markets, and maybe in the Western world, who knows? Gupshup will be there, like Stripe, like Shopify, as you mentioned, and yeah, who knows? Who knows where it will go? But as I said at the very beginning, coming full circle, you're doing extremely well. I've seen you speak a number of times on various different things. I think that every time you talk absolute sense, as you have done over the last hour or so. And so I'm wishing you the absolute best of luck, and thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And Kane, as always, I really enjoy these in-depth conversations and the back and forth. So you're doing a fantastic job. Really enjoy listening to you and chatting with you even more. So thanks for having me here.
Nice one. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please do visit gupshup.io for more information. That is gupshup.io to find out more. Also visit deepgram.com/VUX World if you're looking for speech recognition. And if you are interested in finding out your level of CX maturity and how to improve what you do and what your team do, please do join me for the workshop that I'm running with Cognigy the week after next, vux.world/Cognigy. It's entirely free. It'll take 2 hours and you will leave more informed, more educated, and with a little bit of a plan about how you can improve your maturity. So we will look forward to seeing you then. Beerud, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.